Hello and welcome to the Wildlife Community Podcast, all about wildlife-friendly gardening tips and tricks. This week, we're speaking to a friend of the podcast, Jean Vernon. Jean is an author and a bee enthusiast, but her latest book takes us on a broader journey as she investigates pollinators in general and reveals some of the more surprising species which we don't think of as beneficial for our gardens.
Without which we would be knee-deep in carcasses and bodies. They have a really important role, not just in pollination, they are pollinators, but in the total life cycle of everything.
And we're running another of our popular competitions with a chance to win a signed copy of Jean's new book called Attracting Garden Pollinators, together with one of our brand new artisan barley solitary bee houses, which are just gorgeous. 4 runners-up will also receive a signed copy of Jean's book. All you need to do to be in with a chance of winning is answer this question. Which insect does Jean say feeds live prey to its offspring? Just email your answer to hello@wildlifeworld.co.uk with the subject line podcast competition. You have until the 17th of July. And if you want to find out more, then just head to our website, wildlifeworld.co.uk/blogs/podcast. Now, let's get into it. I'm joined as always by Paul from his wildlife garden up in Cumbria. Hello.
Right.
Very well. How's the garden looking at the moment?
It's peak season in the garden at the moment with fledglings galore. We've got so many fledglings. I've definitely seen robins, blackbirds, loads of blue tits, great tits, coal tits, wood pigeons, and the highlight's got to be spotted flycatchers. Me and Debbie, my wife, have been completely besotted by spotted flycatchers once we noticed that they were nesting. And so we can see them flying onto the nest from the window here. And they laid 5 eggs.
Oh, wow.
3 hatched, and they fledged on Sunday.
Oh, were you there to say your goodbyes?
I wasn't, sadly. I did do a live stream, though, a quick cheeky live stream on Facebook. I set a camera up pointing at the nest.
Oh.
But yeah, it was a day too early to catch them actually leaving, but I did catch them flapping wings and preening and all of that kind of stuff. And I can still hear them. They had like little seep noises around the trees. And I did catch a sight of one of the adults feeding a fledgling in one of the trees this morning, but didn't manage to catch it. Yeah.
Are they loyal to an area then? Will they come back and potentially have chicks in your garden?
I believe so. I think they'll come back to this area. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but the other cool thing about them is that if they have a second brood, and I'm eagerly watching the nest every 5 minutes, I glance over just in case I see the female provisioning the nest again. But yeah, if they have a second brood, the first brood actually stays around and helps catch flies to feed the second brood. And then they all fly off to Africa.
Like some big extended family.
Yeah. Yes.
That's so cute.
They're brilliant. I've got so many pictures and video clips. I'll share some. Maybe we can put some on the blog.
Definitely.
To go with this podcast.
Yes, absolutely. What else is going on in the garden then?
Well, No Mow May turned into Let It Bloom June. So
did you caption that one?
that wasn't mine. I don't think I saw it on Twitter somewhere. But yeah, we have a lot of the plants that we left in May now coming into bloom. So like the self-seeded poppies as well are about to bud burst. So we're going to have a load of colour in the front garden. But yeah, we've got so much yarrow. I had no idea we had so much yarrow.
Yarrow?
Yarrow, yeah. It's an umbellifer, so it's got those multiple flower-headed kind of flat landing pads for pollinators, a bit like cow parsley or wild carrot and all of that kind of stuff. They call them umbellifers. I was just looking out for surprising pollinators.
Good.
I saw a few.
What do you consider a surprising pollinator then?
Well, we always assume that it's going to be bees, maybe butterflies, they're the enigmatic, the species that we all love to fawn over. And mostly bumblebees, because they're the most obvious. You know, a lot of people feel like there's only maybe a couple of species of bees. We got 280-ish, 250 plus of those are solitary bees. So
of course,
a lot of solitary bees are easy to mistake for hoverflies or honeybees or anything like that. So
they're always a lot smaller than I imagine and a lot darker than I imagine.
Yes, you would assume that a lot of things are flies, like buzzing around.
Yeah.
But no, when you get close enough, or if they sit still for long enough, you'll notice that they're actually one of our solitary bees. But I do know something really cool that everybody could do to encourage hoverflies in their garden is
go on.
Make a little hoverfly lagoon. I don't know if we've talked about those before, but
No.
it's really simple. You just get a bowl or a tub or a trough of some kind, and you stick some either grass clippings or leaf litter in there, and then some water, and just leave it. Put it somewhere shady, maybe, so it doesn't dry out in the sun so much. But yeah, hoverflies lay little eggs in the water, and they turn into larvae that are rather unaffectionately referred to as rat-tailed maggots, which are a combination of words there that
bet they enjoy that.
Yeah, that those combination of rat and maggot just send shivers down most people's spines, I think. But they're much more endearing than that. They're like submarine larvae. They've got little tubes on their back end that they stick up above the surface of the water, or the murky, rotting, stagnant water that you create in your hoverfly lagoon. It's to replicate like tree, little hollows in tree stumps and stuff like that, where water accumulates in a natural environment. So if you keep those out, then you might get these rat-tailed maggots in there that will hatch into lovely little hoverflies that will come and pollinate your flowers for you.
Is there much like that to be doing in our garden during the summer, or can we have a little bit of a rest when it comes to wildlife gardening?
Well, personally, I'm a bit of a sporadic gardener. I don't know if you could call me that. I'm a habitat manager, maybe, rather than a gardener. I spend a lot of time wandering around and looking, seeing what's happened, what I've done that, or not done that has benefited the wildlife in the garden.
Like reaping the rewards of what you have done in the autumn and the springtime.
Yeah, spending a lot of time scrubbing the bird baths at the moment. They seem to, with the extra sunshine, the stronger sunshine, they do seem to get a lot of algae in a lot quicker.
Yes.
Yes, something else interesting. I was doing exactly that the other day. I had two bird baths next to each other, one tall one short one. And they were right next to the bird feeding tree. We got an ornamental cherry tree where all of the bird feeders are hanging off. And that caused problems with the bird baths, because the birds, not only would they occasionally poop in there, but they'd be dropping seeds. Tree sparrows are so they're so messy to the point of vandalism. For every seed they eat, I'm sure they toss 100 on the ground or into the bird bath. Anyway, I was scrubbing the little one, and I lifted it up to tilt the water out, and there were voles under there. There was actually a vole's nest under the bird bath. And so I saw these little teeny, like an inch long voles. So I quickly put it back and basically tried not to disturb it too much until the next time I had to scrub it and do it again. I managed to snap a little video clip, and you can see the little baby voles running around. They've grown enough now to move on. So I've now finally been able to move that bird bath to somewhere else where it won't get as mucky. Yeah. Oh,
how nice though. What a lovely discovery.
There's so many interesting things happening in the garden that chances of you seeing them, I mean, you've got to be out there for a start, but you've got to happen to be looking in that place at the right time. And all of these little tapestries of interesting interactions, wildlife interactions going on that would just stay a mystery to us if we didn't get out there and explore. So I've been doing mostly that in the past month.
But that is good proof of what happens if you do take some time out to actually enjoy and spend time in your own garden. Fair enough.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's go and head over to speak to Jean Vernon, who is our guest for this month's episode. Jean, last time we spoke, and I know that really your name, your other name is Mrs. Addicted to Bees, maybe. But last time we spoke, it was very much about bees.
Yes.
This time you're holding in your hand a new book called Attracting Garden Pollinators. Mm-hmm. So we've moved from bees into the more general term of pollinators.
I suppose learning about bees to write the bee book opened up the whole world of garden insects, and everyone thinks about bees being the main pollinators, but there's some really surprising pollinators in the garden. And the more I looked into the bees and talked to other experts, the more I learnt about other creatures, flies for example, or even the wasps are really important garden pollinators. Everyone thinks, oh, we need more pollination, the bees are in trouble, we need to save the bees. But generally they're talking about honeybees. Honeybees aren't the best pollinators, but there's thousands of other creatures in the garden that do pollination work that I wanted to learn about and share the entangled web, I suppose, of biodiversity. It's all interconnected. And so the second book is a snapshot into the quirky world of garden pollinators.
Excellent. And interestingly, when we spoke to Dave Goulson quite recently on our podcast, we talked about the terminology that we use for some pollinators, bugs and creepy crawlies and things of that nature, and how well we've sort of PR'd bees to bring those into people's kind of fascination. Is there a bit of work to do here when it comes to these more quirky pollinators?
Definitely. I mean, if you look at wasps, I'm often asked, what do wasps do? And you probably know, and probably many of the listeners know, that wasps are incredible. I hate using the word pest, but they're incredible pest control in the garden. You know, wasps are carnivorous. Well, that's not strictly true, but they feed live prey to their offspring. The adults tend to feed on nectar to fuel their existence, but they collect caterpillars, they collect aphids, they collect other garden insects, and they feed them to their offspring. If we didn't have wasps, and by wasps I'm talking about the social wasps really, if we didn't have wasps, we'd be inundated with problems in our gardens. Again, I don't like using the word problem, but so another creature that a lot of people really struggle to fall in love with are flies. But flies include hoverflies, which are really unsung heroes of the garden. They're important pollinators, but it also includes things like blue bottles and green bottles and all sorts of other flies that without which we would be knee-deep in carcasses and bodies. You know, they have a really important role, not just in pollination, they are pollinators, but in the total life cycle of everything.
Everything has a role. Everything's here for a reason.
Everything is here for a reason. And I think it's that interconnectedness of everything, you know, that everything in our garden, in nature, it's an entangled web that is all interconnected. And we need to understand that. I've been doing lots of bee walks and talks, and it's very interesting things that people ask you. I was asked by a lady about bee flies. Bee flies are important pollinators. At this time of year, you'll see them feeding on primroses in the garden, or pulmonarias. And the lady said, oh, I read that bee flies, they parasitize or lay their eggs in the nests of mining bees. Is it true? And I said, well, yes, it is. And then she said, well, what can I do about them? And it's like, well, you don't do anything about them. We can't pick and choose the pretty fluffy things that we like. It's like the tigers and the pandas, and ignore the things that we maybe don't approve of their life cycle. They're all interconnected, and without mining bees we wouldn't have bee flies. And if you've got bee flies in the garden, that means you've got a population of mining bees. So one doesn't exist without the other. And I think that is something that people find hard to get their heads around.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your own garden. How have you designed a garden for pollinators?
Well, it's a work in progress, I think, like most people's
Isn't it
gardens.
always?
Yeah. At the moment, my favourite place is we've got kind of like a seating area with a raised, it's like a sunken seating area, and so the garden is at eye level. So I can sit and have a coffee or lunch if I'm really feeling extravagant. And I can look and see what is on the flowers, and that's really nice. So I can observe their activity, I can see what's coming into the garden, and I've called it a bee border, but really it's a pollinator garden, and it's full of different shaped flowers for different pollinators. And it's fascinating to see what does come in.
Do you just like sitting there and watching? And
I do. I don't do it very enough.
Yes.
I don't go out and sit outside enough. But it's a fantastic place to sit. And you know, if friends come, we sit out, and I often interrupt the conversation, going, "Oh, look, a bee." But yeah, that's nice. But the rest of the garden, there's pockets. But actually I look at the garden and there's always loads in flower. I've got lots of pots of bulbs. I've got several areas where there are big clumps of plants that are good for different pollinators. I've got a lot of herbs. Herbs are amazing plants for pollinators, and the great thing about herbs is you get the herbs for your kitchen or your medicinal use, and then the pollinators get the flowers. It's important to remember to let them flower. So herbs is a favourite. My dogs eat a lot of them. I don't have a lawn. I have lots of shrubs. Shrubs are really powerful plants for pollinators because there's lots of flowers in one place. So you've got something like a flowering currant, and if you think about the flowers are like a bunch of grapes, so there's maybe 20 or 30 flowers in a cluster, and then on a plant there can be 100 clusters, so you've got thousands of flowers. And it's a really efficient place for pollinators to feed. So I like shrubs for that reason.
so how can I, you know, are there some easy top tips if I do just have a lawn? What can I kind of introduce?
Well, I'd say plant plug plants of wildflowers that you want to grow. In a lawn, you know, bird's foot trefoil is a fantastic plant, and you can buy plug plants online, and I would plant those in. Also to see what comes up when you let your lawn grow, you'd be surprised, but there's lots of really good lawn, well, they call them weeds, I don't, but lots of really good lawn plants like the ground ivy and the self-heal and all sorts of daisies and buttercups. They're all really good for different creatures, and a lot of them are our native plants. I don't think pollinators are that fussed whether a plant is native or not. There's a lot of controversy about not planting things that aren't native, but if they provide food, then I think that's okay. So I don't get too hung up on that. But lawn-wise, you could just try and leave a strip and see what happens.
Yeah. What have you, over the time that you've had your garden and been developing it towards wildlife, what have you noticed?
The hum, I suppose. I noticed the absence of the hum in the winter when everything is, you know, much slower or overwintering. A lot of wildlife. We have a lot of birds, and they're amazing. But we live on the edge of the countryside, so we're very lucky. We have all sorts of creatures moving in and out, and we get things that you might not want in the garden, like the pheasants and the deer, and occasionally a badger, and we get foxes and hedgehogs. It's very rich in insect life. We're quite lucky. We don't really live near arable farming, and it has come alive. It's lovely seeing the butterflies in the summer, and the ladybirds and the beetles, and the soil is alive, and that's something people don't really think about. You know, the soil is part of the process. The soil itself is an environment for all sorts of mini beasts and microbes that are really important in the food chain and the life cycle of your garden. Definitely that's something that everyone could work on with a compost bin and a wormery, and feeding the soil to feed their plants and not using chemicals and toxins.
How are pollinators doing generally in Britain at the moment? Is it a bit of a sad story, or is the work that we're all doing in our gardens helping?
I think it is making a difference. I have to have hope.
Yeah.
I find otherwise it's just too depressing. So I have hope that by spreading the word and encouraging people to look after the wildlife and look after the little things, that the message will gradually seep through and it will make a difference. But in general, I think pollinators are in huge decline. You interviewed Dave Goulson recently, and his book highlights so many of the things that are going on, and it's important to highlight that. But I find it hard to focus on that. I have to focus on the other side of it and spreading the word and working, as does Dave. So I do find the whole climate and environment story at the moment really hard, really dark, and I find that hard to focus on. So I'm trying to do my bit in spreading the word and showing people the beauty of the little things, and rather than fighting battles that I can't possibly win, I would rather do something that I can do. So talking to children, talking to people who have an interest, showing them the beauty, showing them the life cycles and the stories of some of our pollinators, especially the bees, of course, but they've all got amazing stories. And also this thing about caterpillars, in the garden, and that people see a caterpillar and think, oh my God, I've got caterpillars, I've got to get rid of them. And we have to stop having that panic moment. We need to understand that our plants are the bottom of the food chain, and that caterpillars start off as eggs, and the caterpillar eggs are laid on very specific host plants. So the adult moth or butterfly spends a lot of time finding a healthy specimen of the host plant it needs for its larvae and laying its eggs. It doesn't lay its eggs all over the garden on everything. Like the mullein moth caterpillar, if you grow verbascum, which is a mullein, you're likely to get the mullein moth caterpillar on your verbascum plants. Verbascum's a lovely garden plant. The caterpillars are spectacular. They're like giant blimps with yellow and green spots and stripes, and I see them in the garden, and to me they're better than the flowers, and yet people want to spray them. And I know they eat the plants, but they won't kill the plant. And I look at it as if the caterpillar's doing the Chelsea chop. It's chopping the plant down in its prime, and the plant will grow back even stronger. It doesn't die. Yeah. And once the caterpillars have got to blimp level, they stop eating, and then they pupate and overwinter, or whatever their life cycle is, to hatch out again as adults. So your plants will be fine, they will still flower a bit later, and you've had the caterpillar. Of course, there's a few caterpillars that are deemed to be a garden pest, but sometimes if you don't want caterpillars eating your cabbages, then don't grow cabbages. By growing the host plant, you're inviting the adults in to lay their eggs, and you're providing them with food. They're going to come.
Perhaps we could go for a little walk, and you could point out a few of these to me, and some of the stories behind some of the pollinators we might find.
So there's quite a lot of surprising pollinators that people might not think of as pollinators. For example, beetles. Beetles are very interesting. They are some of the earliest pollinators in existence, and they used to pollinate the magnolias, which are really ancient plants, and they used to chew around the flowers and move the pollen around. And we don't really think about beetles as pollinators.
No, I would never have made that connection.
They're not all of them are pollinators, but some of them are. So, and that includes things like ladybirds. They move from flower to flower. I mean, they're not conscious pollinators. I mean, most pollinators aren't conscious pollinators. They don't know they're pollinating, but they do move pollen around. So there's a lovely little beetle called the fat-legged beetle, and it has fat thighs. And I was told it was the females that had the fat thighs, but actually it's the males. But it's a very cute one, and you can find those in open poppies and things in the summer, and they're pollinators. And even the pollen beetle, I mean, it can be a problem, but it's called a pollen beetle because it eats pollen, and it's a really important pollinator. So beetles is a surprise, a lot of people don't realise. Wasps we've talked about briefly. Again, important pollinators. They visit the flowers for the nectar, but they pick up the pollen on their bodies as they move around. Butterflies and moths are interesting. So many different species. Again, moving from flower to flower. The adults feed on nectar, or most of the adults feed on nectar. And then, hello, aren't you beautiful?
What's that?
It's a carder bee, but it was very ginger. I wanted to have a look at it.
It was. The colour was quite
very
distinctive.
Ginger. There's another. Oh, it looks like we've got a worker. Who are you? Oh goodness, you are. Hang on a minute. Who are you? You're very. Oh, you're very dark. I've got a feeling that might be a hairy-footed flower bee female. Might have to catch her. She's very quick though.
She is a bit.
That's why I think that's what it is. She's gone. She might come back. The males have their fluffy, feathery legs, but the females are all black. So hornets are important pollinators.
Hornets?
Hornets.
Oh, we all shy away from them, don't we?
And it's such a shame because they're such gentle giants. They're amazing creatures. They're so beautiful, and like the wasps, or like the social wasps, they have a similar life cycle. And they do a lot of pest control. Don't like the word pest. But again, they feed live prey to their offspring. So they collect caterpillars, aphids, other garden insects for food for their little ones. So we're wandering around the herb nursery, and I'm just I like this bed here because this has got a lot of Apiaceae, which were known as the umbellifers. So the flat-headed flowers of things like fennel and lovage and dill and parsley, and even carrots and parsnips are in the same family. In fact, it's sometimes called the carrot family. And one of the projects I like doing with kids, if when you were growing up you might have grown carrot tops,
Yes.
just to see them grow a bit, but you can grow them and they will flower because they're biennial. So when we pull a carrot to eat the root and then we cut the top off, if we plant the top, it will never grow a new root, it won't grow a new tap root. But it will, if you keep it going, it will flower.
Oh.
And those flowers are really important for hoverflies and flies and wasps and other pollinators, the shorter tongue pollinators. So things like flies have very short tongues, so that includes the hoverflies, also includes the honeybees, and they feed on different shaped flowers. So this, we're always told that we need to have something in flower every month of the year, which is true. But you also need to think about the flower shape, and that's really important because a lot of our pollinators have long tongues and they can't feed off the short flowers, and some of them have short tongues and they can't feed off the longer flowers. So having a variety of flower shapes is not just making your garden nicer to look at, it's making it a better place for pollinators.
And you've mentioned in the past that they're very much attracted to blue flowers. What is it about blue and pollinators?
Well, they have a different way of seeing. I mean, bees, for example, see in the UV spectrum. So to a bee, a red flower looks black. And butterflies seem to be attracted to pink flowers. I don't know why. But generally the mauves, the pinks and the blues do seem to be more attractive to different things. But in the same way, you know, yellows are attracted to others. So I'm not sure of the difference, but it's an interesting thing to look in the garden and see what's feeding. I was in a garden the other day where they'd got white pulmonaria, and then they'd got the normal pink and blue, and the pollinators were on the pink and blue, but there was nothing feeding off the white one. Now that could be to do with the nectar levels, or it could be to do with the colour. I don't know.
But it's another reason to have the variety in your garden.
Yes, it's another reason that the more mix you can grow and the more variety, the more you're providing food for different things. And you might not know what will feed on something, but that's not a reason not to grow it. Is have a look. And you know, it's a fun thing with the kids, is to see what is feeding on what. And you know, which plants the butterflies do like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if, you know, if one colour flower is more popular. I mean, there's so many activities you could do with the children outside just to get them interested. I mean, there's a lovely daisy over there, and I don't know if there's anything feeding off that, and some little violas. And I would expect to, you know, to be seeing all sorts of things.
Tell us a little bit about your book then. What can we expect from your book?
Well, the book's kind of an introduction. It features the groups of pollinators that we might have in our garden, and gives you some information about what you can do to support them and attract them. And so for each group, which is the butterflies and the bees, the moths, the wasps, the flies, the beetles, for each section I've picked 5 that have got interesting stories, or about 5. And so there's some great characters in there that you may or may not have seen in your garden, but you might look out for now. And I've tried to pick the ones that have got interesting life cycle, or an interesting story that you might not know about.
Yeah.
There's a lovely little wasp, it's very rare, called the Heath Potter wasp.
Heath Potter?
Heath Potter.
Okay.
And she lives down in Devon, and she collects mud and clay, and she makes perfect tiny little Grecian urns out of the mud. And she sticks them to the stem of a heather plant, and she lays her eggs inside, and she also pops in caterpillars and other garden creatures, so that when the eggs hatch they've got a lunchbox.
Nice.
And then she seals it, but she makes lots of these little pots, and they're stuck on the plants, and they're just perfect miniature Grecian urns. And I just think it's amazing, just amazing. And I'd never heard of it, and I met an entomologist, John Walters, and Bridget wrote about it in her book, and I was fascinated. I haven't been to see them yet, but it's on my hit list.
Yeah.
Which is quite long. So it's the stories really, and also the understanding, you know, explaining that wasps are a bit of a bother in the summer, or can be. The social wasps can be a bother in the summer, but actually they do a lot of good, and we need to fall in love with these things. We need to understand their place and their life cycle, and we need to live and let live.
Yeah, the more we understand about them, the more we will appreciate them, and therefore possibly become sort of happier for them to be around us.
Definitely, it's standing back and observing rather than reaching for the pesticides. You could spray something in the garden, but then it's like dropping the pebble into the lake. That every action has a reaction, and the ripples from that pebble, that they spread for yards. And you know, one spray for your pest control has such a knock-on effect. And actually, you know, things do eat the leaves, and there's a sorrel here, and it's absolutely full of holes in places, and yet there's plenty there for us.
Yes, yeah, more than enough.
Grow a bit extra, and you know, you still got your harvest. And sometimes things get eaten, and you either decide that you're not going to grow it again because it is a magnet for slugs or something, or you grow more, or you grow it in a protected area like a greenhouse or a cold frame, where you can put a barrier up to stop whatever it is that's eating them. it's working with nature and restoring the natural balance in the garden is really important.
Paul, the one which struck me, which Jean mentioned, and I think you've often tried to change people's opinions on this species, is the wasp. I mean, we do spend like half our time eating picnics or barbecues outside in the summer, with most people just trying to bat them away, but you think we should be looking at them in awe, don't we? And I think Jean does as well.
Yeah, well, there's so many species of them, and we don't recognize or acknowledge 98% of the wasp species out there. So
98%?
Yeah, well, that's a guess because I haven't done the sums, but there's 8,000 species of wasp apparently, around that many in the UK. Gosh. That's bearing in mind that there's 280 species of solitary bee, that's a huge amount of species.
Yes.
And we only really notice 2 or 3 species, the social ones, the kind of cider thugs that come and harass you in late summer, as you were saying. The rest of them, we basically don't know about, have no idea about what they get up to, but they spend a lot of time doing really beneficial things, not just for humans, but for everything else in the natural world. I mean, granted, some of them do parasitize some other species, and I imagine those are the species like some caterpillars and
yes,
who get injected with eggs while they're still alive and then get eaten from the inside out. I imagine they're not too keen on them, but still, that's fascinating.
Yes, yeah. If you think about it in those sorts of terms, it's a little, does make you shiver a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, but there's not, red in tooth and claw, as they say. So nature it's full of those kind of intriguing, disturbing, but interesting stories.
What else do you think we should be bringing to the fore in the pollinator world?
Well, I was out looking. I swapped my lens over. I was out with my macro lens earlier, and I saw one of the social wasps, but that was nectaring. And usually, social wasps don't feed on nectar so much at this time of year, because they're usually getting their sugary, nectary type fix from the larvae that they're feeding with meat. At the moment, they should be out harassing you for sausages off the barbecue, or out grabbing caterpillars and other insects, or cutting chunks off roadkill that they find, because they take that meat back to the nest, feed that to the larvae eat the meat, and then they exude this sugary solution that the adult wasps then drink. That's their flight fuel, basically. So it's pretty unusual to see a social wasp nectaring at this time of year, because they're normally out looking for meat. People who know a bit about wasps know that social wasps collect meat at this time of year, but sometimes they'll think that they're actually eating it, but no, they're just butchering it up into small pieces to fly back to the nest.
You just don't think of insects as carnivores, I suppose, do you?
No, but the surprising ones are the flies, basically. So flies that you normally associate with other habitats. I'm thinking flesh flies, blue bottles, dung flies, yellow dung flies especially. I nominate yellow dung fly as my surprising pollinator, I think.
I've never even heard of it.
No, well, they're pretty fascinating in themselves. But when I first bought my macro lens, I remember going out really excited, going, I'll get some really great bee photographs today. And all I got was a photo of a yellow dung fly. I was a bit disappointed, but when I looked into, what they do, because I assumed that they just go and land on cowpats, eat cowpats, and then lay eggs in cowpats, and that's all about their existence, cowpats. But no, their larvae eat cowpats. The flies themselves are actually partially carnivorous, so they'll eat other flies, but they'll feed on nectar, which is why I keep seeing them on flowers.
And so therefore they are, well, what Jean was kind of terming unconscious pollinators. They're not kind of consciously pollinating, but they are traveling between plants.
Yeah, I'm not sure if any insects actually consciously.
Yeah, she said the same. Yes.
Yeah, because they're all accidental. They're all going there for the pollen to eat, like the protein in the pollen, or to
enjoy the nectar.
Yeah, or to provision it for their young. And the same goes for nectar, although nectar is usually used as a rocket fuel. So it's that symbiosis between plants and insects, how they've developed. It is absolutely amazing. Nature's brilliant.
Yeah. Right, we better leave it there before we get a bit too deep.
Yes.
Thank you as ever for listening to the Wildlife Community Podcast. If you're brand new to us, then we've got lots of past episodes available for you from your podcast provider, featuring experts from the worlds of wildlife and gardening, including Bridget Strawbridge, Dave Goulson, Dan Rouse, and we even have another podcast featuring Jean Vernon. Remember, if you're listening to this episode in the first week of its launch, then do enter our competition to win a signed copy of Jean's new book, all about attracting garden pollinators. You can find all the information online at wildlifeworld.co.uk/blogs/podcast. And Paul and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.